February 23, 1945. On a black island of volcanic ash and smoke, a man crawled forward through hell. His name was Herschel Woody Williams, a 21-year-old Marine corporal carrying 70 pounds of metal, fuel, and compressed nitrogen strapped to his back. The air burned with cordite and sulfur. The earth itself seemed to shake with every explosion. Ahead, Japanese machine guns roared from pillboxes buried deep in the rock, cutting down anyone who dared to move. Behind him, 3 Marine companies had already been stopped cold. Around him, his demolition unit lay silent, all 6 men dead or wounded. The only thing left between his pinned-down battalion and annihilation was a single flamethrower operator with 7 seconds of fire in his tanks. 7 seconds of exposure. 7 seconds to live or die. That was the reality of Iwo Jima, the most violent, claustrophobic battlefield of the Pacific War, a place where courage and mathematics collided. Because on that island, carrying fire meant carrying death. Statisticians would later measure the odds with chilling precision. Flamethrower operators suffered a 92% casualty rate, not wounded, dead, missing, or maimed beyond return. For every 100 men who carried the M2 flamethrower ashore, barely 8 would walk away. The weapon itself was deceptively simple, 3 cylindrical tanks joined by rubber hoses and steel valves. 2 held 4 gallons of fuel, a mix of diesel oil and high-octane aviation gasoline. Between them sat a smaller tank of compressed nitrogen, the pressure that would force the burning mixture through the hose and out of the wand at 300 pounds per square inch. On the battlefield, the operator had 8 seconds of total burn time, 8 seconds that could decide the fate of an entire platoon. Under ideal conditions, the weapon's reach was 40 yards, but Iwo Jima was the opposite of ideal. The terrain swallowed men whole, the wind shifted without warning, and volcanic grit fouled every mechanism. The flame was terrifyingly beautiful, a torrent of orange fire that ignited bunkers, rolled through tunnels, and sucked the air out of enclosed spaces. It killed by fire and suffocation alike. In the narrow caves of Iwo Jima, there was nowhere to run. The flame entered like a living creature, devouring everything it touched. The Marines who used it were not reckless or naive. They were volunteers, or sometimes simply the strongest men available, chosen for their size and endurance. They trained for weeks to master a weapon that wanted to kill its operator almost as much as the enemy. At Camp Lejeune, instructors taught them how to balance the heavy tanks, how to brace for recoil, how to check for leaks that could turn them into walking torches. They learned by singeing off their eyebrows, their sleeves, sometimes worse. And they learned that once you pulled the trigger, every Japanese rifle on the island would aim for you. Among them was a private named Joseph Robakiewicz, a farm boy from Pennsylvania, who had enlisted 2 years earlier out of patriotic duty. He could have stayed stateside as a guard, safe from combat. Instead, he volunteered for the demolition and flamethrower school after hearing stories from Guadalcanal and Tarawa. He didn't know it yet, but his decision would send him to the deadliest square miles in Marine Corps history. While men like Williams and Robakiewicz trained to fight on the other side of the Pacific, a Japanese general was building a fortress that defied imagination. His name was Tadamichi Kurobayashi, a career soldier, a poet, and a realist. Unlike many of his peers, he knew America. In the 1920s, he had lived in Texas, trained with American officers, and admired the vastness of their industrial power. When he was ordered to defend Iwo Jima, a volcanic rock halfway between Tokyo and the Mariana Islands, he understood he could not win. But he could make victory so costly that America might reconsider invading Japan itself. Kurobayashi refused to defend the beaches, knowing naval guns would obliterate anything in the open. Instead, he ordered his 23,000 men to dig. Over 8 months, they carved 11 miles of tunnels and chambers into the mountain, an underground city of concrete and basalt. There were living quarters, hospitals, ammunition stores, and artillery positions connected by tunnels wide enough for men to run through unseen. Pillboxes were arranged in overlapping fields of fire so that every bunker could protect its neighbour. A Marine assault on one position would draw machine gun fire from 2 others. Above ground stood over 600 reinforced blockhouses, their walls 4 feet thick and camouflaged so perfectly that aerial reconnaissance barely detected them. It was the most sophisticated defence network of the Pacific War, and it was built to annihilate whoever set foot on that island. Kuribayashi stocked it with 300 anti-aircraft guns, 438 artillery pieces and nearly 70 anti-tank weapons. He banned banzai charges, forbade suicide attacks, and told his men to fight from concealment until the Americans were within point-blank range. He knew that if every soldier killed 10 Marines before dying, Japan would cripple America's invasion plans. By February 1945, the island was ready, and so were the Marines. Operation Detachment would involve 70,000 men supported by the largest armada yet assembled in the Pacific, 12 aircraft carriers, 8 battleships, and nearly 500 vessels of every type. Lieutenant General Holland Smith, commanding the 5th Amphibious Corps, requested 10 days of pre-invasion bombardment. He was given 3. Admiral Chester Nimitz needed the fleet for Okinawa and could not spare the time. For 72 hours, battleships hurled thousands of shells into the island, tearing up beaches, cratering ridges, and sending columns of smoke miles into the air. It looked like no one could have survived. But Kuribayashi's men were safe underground. When the bombardment stopped, they climbed back to their positions, loaded their weapons, and waited. At 9 a.m. on February 19th, the first waves of Marines hit the southeastern beaches. They expected sand. What they found was ash, soft, black, suffocating ash that swallowed their boots and stopped their tanks cold. The beaches rose in steep terraces that offered no cover. The first hour passed with almost no fire, and some Marines began to think the defenders were dead. Then, as 30,000 men crowded into the narrow beachhead, the mountain erupted. Mortars, artillery, and machine guns opened simultaneously from every direction. Mount Suribachi spat fire from a dozen hidden batteries. Bullets tore through ranks of Marines who could neither dig in nor advance. Vehicles burned, ammunition exploded, and bodies disappeared into clouds of black dust. The first day cost over 500 dead and more than 2,000 wounded, and the Marines had moved barely 700 yards inland. Among those still waiting offshore were the flamethrower teams. Their time would come soon enough. By the third day of the invasion, the beaches of Iwo Jima had turned into a graveyard of twisted metal and burning fuel. The Marines had fought for every inch, clawing their way across terrain that gave them no shelter. The volcano loomed behind them like a god of death, spewing smoke and lead. It was February 21st when the call went out for flamethrowers. Conventional firepower had failed. Machine guns, mortars, and naval shells could not reach the bunkers buried under solid rock. If the Marines wanted to advance, someone would have to crawl up to those openings and burn them out one by one. Corporal Herschel Woody Williams was that someone. He was a demolition sergeant with the 3rd Marine Division, armed with the same 70-pound flamethrower he had trained with in the Pacific heat months earlier. He had already seen combat on Guam, where he learned the brutal effectiveness of fire against fortified positions. But nothing on Guam compared to what waited here. The pillboxes of Iwo Jima were concrete monsters, low, invisible, and connected by tunnels so that destroying one often meant facing counterfire from another. As the Marines moved inland toward the airfields, they met walls of steel disguised as earth. Every crater became a trap, every ridge a killing ground. The doctrine for flamethrower assault looked logical on paper. A rifle squad would lay down suppressing fire while the operator advanced, protected by covering bursts. At 20 yards, he would unleash short jets of flame into the aperture, then withdraw to reload. In reality, the plan collapsed the moment the operator stood up. Snipers watched for the distinctive outline of the fuel tanks. The second the wand ignited, hundreds of rifles converged on that flicker of orange. The flame that terrified the enemy also betrayed the man who wielded it. William's first mission began when his company was pinned down near Airfield No. 1. 3 previous attempts to cross the open ground had ended in disaster. Tanks had bogged down or been destroyed by hidden anti-tank guns. The Marines could move neither forward nor back. Their commander called Williams over and told him the only words that mattered. Those pillboxes have to go. Williams looked around. Every member of his demolition team was dead or wounded. He would have to go alone. He picked 4 riflemen for cover and started crawling. The air shimmered with heat. Bullets struck the steel tanks on his back but failed to penetrate. He reached the first bunker and sent a stream of fire into the narrow slit of the opening. The inside erupted. Screams followed, then silence. Moving to the next, he spotted smoke rising from a vent on the roof. He climbed onto the concrete shell and fired directly into it, turning the vent into a chimney of flame. For 4 hours, Williams repeated the same cycle. Advance, fire, retreat, refill, repeat. Each time he returned to his lines, his face was grey with ash, his uniform charred. 5 times he crawled back through that open killing field to refill his tanks, and 5 times he returned into the inferno. When Japanese soldiers rushed him with bayonets, he burned them at point-blank range. When machine guns opened from multiple sides, he kept moving forward. When the air turned into a furnace, he pressed the trigger anyway. By the end, 7 pillboxes that had stopped 3 Marine companies were gone. The price was 4 dead riflemen and 1 Marine who had defied probability. Williams's actions would later earn him the Medal of Honor, though in the moment all it earned him was exhaustion and silence. He had done what the math said was nearly impossible. Other operators were not as lucky. Private Joseph Rabakiewicz landed 2 days earlier, carrying 90 pounds of gear through surf that nearly drowned him. Seasick and terrified, he dragged his weapon ashore and joined the assault. Over the next 3 weeks, he attacked 7 bunkers and caves, each one a duel fought in seconds. On March 8th, his squad was trapped in a gully beneath an elevated pillbox. Machine guns tore into them. 4 Marines fell dead instantly, 5 more wounded. Rabakiewicz dragged 2 of them to safety under fire, patched their wounds with trembling hands, and then returned to finish the job. A grenade exploded near him, shrapnel slicing across his fingers. He ignored it. With a bar gunner providing cover, he advanced up the slope and poured fire into the pillbox, burning it out completely. Only when the battlefield fell silent did he notice his hand bleeding freely. A medic bandaged him and ordered him back to the beach. He refused. "They'll need me again," he said, and went back to the line. He wasn't alone. Across the island, flamethrower men were dying faster than replacements could be brought forward. Their role was indispensable but suicidal. A rifleman could dive for cover. A flame operator had to stay upright, exposed and deliberate. The tanks made them slow. The hose tethered them to the weapon like a leash. Even when the tanks were hit and didn't explode, the concussive shock could rupture the nitrogen cylinder, sending it rocketing off like a missile. When the tanks did ignite, the operator never had a chance. Marines told stories of comrades who vanished in a flash of light, leaving only melted fragments of steel. By early March, 1 battalion reported 92% casualties among its flamethrower personnel, the highest rate of any unit type in Marine Corps history. The statistics seemed unreal, yet they reflected simple physics. To use a flamethrower effectively, you had to be within 20 yards of your target. At that distance, even an average marksman could not miss. The bright flame exposed you instantly. The heat distorted your aim, and the fuel ran out in seconds. Every attack was a calculated gamble against fate. Survive one, and the next would probably kill you. And yet, they kept volunteering. The motivation wasn't glory or orders. It was survival of the group. When a squad was pinned down, the only way out was to burn the nest that held them. If a flamethrower man fell, someone else would pick up his weapon, no matter how little training they had. Private Rudy Ortiz did exactly that. When both assigned operators in his company were killed, he grabbed the nearest unit and went forward alone, burning 10 pillboxes before he himself was cut down. He was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. The psychological weight was almost worse than the physical danger. Flamethrower operators knew that surrender was impossible. Japanese troops who saw the tanks never took prisoners. They shot them on sight. Even among their own comrades, flame men carried a strange aura, part fear, part reverence. They were the ones who walked into fire so that others might live. As the battle ground into its 3rd week, armoured replacements began to arrive. Sherman tanks modified with flamethrowers of their own, nicknamed Zippos after the lighter brand. Each could carry 300 gallons of napalm fuel and project it 400 feet. They could incinerate entire tunnel systems without exposing a human operator. The tanks changed everything. Their armour could absorb hits that would have killed a man instantly. When the Zippos moved forward, Marines followed close behind, cheering the river of fire that cleared the way. One officer later said the flamethrower tanks, more than any other weapon, won the battle. But the tanks could not reach every position. Many of the caves and pillboxes were hidden behind ridges, accessible only on foot. For those, the men with the M2 still had to go in. Crawling, dragging, sweating, burning, and they kept dying. By March 26th, the island was finally declared secure. 36 days of unbroken combat had reduced Iwo Jima to an open wound. More than 24,000 Marines were casualties, nearly 7,000 were dead. Among the Japanese defenders, almost all 21,000 were killed, most buried where they fought. The battle was the bloodiest in Marine Corps history, and the only one where American losses exceeded those of the enemy. When the guns finally fell silent on Iwo Jima, the island looked less like a battlefield than the surface of another planet, a wasteland of cratered ash, melted steel, and smoke rising from the earth itself. Beneath the black soil lay the bodies of more than 27,000 men from both sides, entombed in the island they had fought to possess. The surviving Marines moved through the wreckage in silence, too numb to celebrate. There was no victory here, only survival. Among them, the few remaining flamethrower operators stood apart, eyes hollow, faces burned, uniforms torn by heat and shrapnel. They had done the impossible and paid for it in blood. Corporal Woody Williams was one of the few still breathing. Weeks after the battle ended, he was flown back to Hawaii, where doctors treated burns that would never fully heal. His citation would describe extraordinary heroism, but Williams himself never used that word. He said only that he was trying to help his men move forward, that it was just what needed to be done. When President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck later that year, Williams accepted it for the Marines who hadn't come home. Of the 12 awards given for flamethrower actions on Iwo Jima, half were posthumous. For others, the war didn't end when the fighting stopped. Private Joseph Rabakiewicz lived through the battle, but the flame never left him. His hand, wounded by grenade shrapnel, never regained its full strength. His mind, haunted by what he'd seen, never found peace. He kept a small pouch containing a photograph of a Japanese soldier's wife and children, taken from a body in one of the caves. Decades later, he tried to return it to Japan as an act of repentance, but the consulate showed no interest. He died still thinking about that photograph, a reminder that every target he burned had once been a living human being with a family. The moral weight of that weapon was immense. Riflemen could convince themselves that death came from distance. Artillerymen rarely saw what their shells did. But flamethrower operators had no distance. They saw the faces. They heard the screams. They watched the flame crawl through openings, sucking the oxygen from the air, turning men into shadows that never moved again. Many never spoke about it. Those who did broke down mid-sentence as if the words themselves carried heat. Long before psychologists had a name for it, these men were living with post-traumatic stress. They drank too much, woke up screaming, avoided the smell of gasoline. They carried fire in their memories as surely as they had carried it on their backs, yet even in horror, they understood their purpose. On that island, the flamethrower wasn't a symbol of cruelty, it was survival. Without it, the Marines would have been trapped in front of those pillboxes for weeks longer, suffering even greater losses. The weapon was monstrous, but in the twisted arithmetic of war, it saved lives by ending battles faster. A single burst of fire could accomplish what hours of shelling could not. It was the purest expression of war's contradiction, mercy through destruction. The introduction of mechanized flamethrowers, the Sherman Zippo tanks, had proven the concept beyond doubt. Each tank carried hundreds of gallons of napalm and could project a jet of flame the length of a football field. Their impact was devastating, their psychological effect even more so. Japanese soldiers, trained to die rather than surrender, fled from flame in terror. Commanders later testified that the flame tanks were the most effective weapon of the entire campaign. Still, they couldn't replace the men. The tunnels of Iwo Jima were too narrow, too irregular, too hidden for machines. Only a man could crawl inside with a portable unit and finish the job, and so to the very end human beings remained the delivery system for fire. When the final reports were compiled, the numbers were almost beyond comprehension. Over 70,000 Marines had landed, 24,000 became casualties, nearly 7,000 were dead. Among flamethrower operators, losses reached as high as 92% in some units, the highest casualty rate for any American specialty in World War II. By comparison, ordinary rifle platoons suffered around 33% losses. Even tank crews, often called suicide assignments, fared better. The average combat lifespan of a flame operator, calculated later by military analysts, was measured not in days but in minutes. 4 minutes of cumulative exposure before death or disabling injury. The question lingers, why would anyone volunteer? Some did it out of patriotism, drawn by the need to fight after Pearl Harbor. Others were chosen for strength, for stamina, for the simple fact that they could carry the 70-pound load. A few saw the weapon's necessity and accepted the burden willingly, and some volunteered again and again because no one else would, because their brothers needed them. Private Rudy Ortiz had no flamethrower training at all, yet after watching 2 operators die, he picked up a discarded unit and advanced into the fire. He destroyed 10 enemy positions before being killed. He wasn't assigned to that role. He simply refused to let his company die without trying. That impulse, to protect the man beside you, even at your own expense, defined every flame operator who walked onto Iwo Jima. Strategically, the island was a paradox. Officially, it was captured to provide a base for fighter escorts and an emergency landing field for B-29 bombers striking Japan. After the war, the Air Force claimed that more than 2,000 damaged bombers had landed safely there, saving 24,000 airmen's lives. Later historians questioned those numbers, suggesting that many were routine refuelings, not emergencies. But to the men who fought there, such debates were irrelevant. They hadn't fought for theory. They fought because they were told to take the island, and they did, at a cost that reshaped military planning forever. The carnage on Iwo Jima, followed by the even bloodier Battle of Okinawa, forced American leaders to confront what an invasion of Japan would mean. Intelligence predicted hundreds of thousands of Allied casualties, perhaps 1 million if every Japanese soldier fought with Kuribayashi's determination. The lesson of Iwo Jima helped push President Truman toward the decision that ended the war by fire on a far larger scale, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The flames that began in a Marine's hands on that black island ended in a mushroom cloud over Japan. For the survivors, peace was uneasy. Woody Williams spent years battling guilt and nightmares. It wasn't until a religious awakening in the 1960s that he said he finally found forgiveness, not for the enemy, but for himself. He devoted the rest of his life to helping veterans, founding the Herschel Woody Williams Medal of Honor Foundation and speaking about the unseen cost of war. He lived to 98, the last surviving Medal of Honor recipient from World War II. When he died in 2022, he asked to be remembered not for what he had done, but for the men who didn't come home. The memory of Iwo Jima lives on in stone and bronze. The Marine Corps War Memorial in Arlington, inspired by Joe Rosenthal's photograph of the flag raising on Mount Suribachi, has become an icon of courage. Few who see it realize that half of the 6 men immortalized in that statue were killed before the battle ended. Their bodies rest in the same soil where they once planted the flag. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, speaking at the island cemetery dedication in 1945, said words that still echo through the Corps. Among the men who fought on Iwo Jima, uncommon valor was a common virtue. That valor shone brightest among those who carried fire. They understood that the odds were impossible, that 92% of them would never return, and yet they went. They carried 70 pounds of fuel across open ground, against machine guns, through heat and smoke, into places no sane man would enter, because someone had to. They were not fearless. They were simply unwilling to let fear decide who lived and who died. Today, the island is quiet. Renamed Ioto by the Japanese government, it remains off-limits to the public, its tunnels collapsing slowly under the weight of time. The beaches look the same as they did in 1945, black and soft and haunted. Once a year, aging veterans return for a reunion of honor, where former enemies meet as friends. They stand together on that ash, Americans and Japanese alike, and remember what the island cost both sides. Woody Williams once said that when they came to Iwo Jima as enemies, they left as students, having learned what courage, sacrifice, and forgiveness truly mean. The Flamethrower Operators of Iwo Jima were ordinary men placed in extraordinary circumstances. Farm boys, students, labourers, men who became weapons because war required it. They carried flame not out of hatred but necessity. They knew that every time they pulled the trigger they might not have another chance, but they also knew that their brothers were counting on them. That was enough. They advanced into the fire because the mission demanded it, because friendship demanded it, because courage demanded it. 92% of them never walked back. The rest carried the memories until they died. In the end, their story is not about a weapon or a battle. It's about the cost of duty, about men who knew the odds, understood the price, and went anyway. They proved that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act in spite of it. On that black island in 1945, surrounded by flame and ash, they showed what it truly means to walk into fire.